everyone, welcome back if you're new here. My name is Bella. I love all things design and DIY, and today we're going to be talking floral design. So one thing that I haven't talked about on this channel yet is that my family owns a floral business. We've been in business for just over 20 years, so I basically grew up in a flower shop. We lived where we work and we still do, so I've basically been a florist since I was a child. Flowers can get very pricey, especially within the past few years. Prices are just going up, and so I know it's a luxury that not everyone can really afford, and I've been really lucky to always have access to that. But if we didn't have a flower shop, I absolutely would not. And so I think one really amazing kind of element to bring into your home design arsenal, entertaining arsenal, whatever it might be, even if it's just for you, is floral design. And so now that flowers are actually starting to bloom outside where I live, which is my absolute favorite way to source flowers, is right from the backyard, I thought I would take you through kind of the seasons coming up and just give you floral design tips here and there and make some really fun arrangements together. And so what I want to cover in today's video is, I think, one of the most, if not the most common problem that a lot of people have when they're designing flowers at home, and that is getting your blooms to stay in place. I love the look of a very wild, free-flowing kind of arrangement where the blooms are just sticking out in all sorts of directions. That sort of style looks completely effortless just with your eye. However, there is some tricks that go into making it look like you just threw them in place, but are actually holding the stems exactly where they need to be. And so today I'm going to go over 3 different ways that you can easily keep your stems in place. So we're going to start off with, I think, one of the most challenging sorts of vessels to work with, and that is something that has a very wide top. In a container like this, if you tried to design something that you wanted kind of spilling out, you could easily achieve that spilling sort of effect, but since the flowers would all kind of droop to the sides, it would be really hard to fill in the empty space in the middle. If you threw a bunch of stems in here and let them just fall naturally, it would just kind of create a circle of flowers around the edges and not really have anything be too evenly spaced throughout the entire surface area. And so how I would keep these stems in place is very simple, and that's just some tape. Now, this is a technique that we've used all the time in the shop, but I was actually just talking to my mom before this, and she suggested that I mention a few other options for a container like this. We're trying to make little changes wherever we can to get away from plastic in our designs, because there is so much single-use plastic waste in like higher scale floral design. So I'm going to show you with tape today, but 2 alternatives that my mom mentioned: chicken wire, which I know she's been experimenting with, and grapevine. So with both of these, you just kind of create a mound that goes inside the vessel, and then you have lots of little holes to be able to stick your stems into. Maybe I can get her to guest star on one of these episodes in the future and she can show us those methods, but today we're going to be going with good old tape. So with the tape method, you're going to want to start with a completely dry vessel without any water in it. This is going to help because when you pour water into a container, there can be a lot of splashing that happens, and having the surface be wet is going to make it very difficult to stick your tape to the vase. So keep that in mind. You're just going to start by simply 1 piece of tape straight across the top, and then you're going to do 1 piece of tape straight across the other way, so you create an X shape. I've extended this grid out with 2 more pieces of tape on either side of both of these X marks. I would say that this is the maximum amount of tape I would use for a vase. I don't think that there would be any reason to have any more holes than that. You can also do less and kind of work this out into different configurations. It all sort of depends on how many stems you have and the structure of the actual stem. Some stems create beautiful structural elements by themselves without any help at all. And so if you can kind of start with those as your base, then that will help you with those single blooms that are a little bit more top heavy that don't stay where you want them to be. But I think that's something that we'll cover in a later video. And then what I do to finish this off is run a piece of tape all around the rim here, just to hold all of that tape in place, especially again once you pour the water in and it gets this wet. And also once you start sticking stems in here, sometimes it can knock the tape off and then it just becomes a mess deep inside your arrangement. So you don't want that. You want this to be nice and secure so that if you were to pat it like this with a decent amount of pressure, your tape is not going anywhere. So this is the first method I would use. However, obviously this is using single-use plastic. So let's talk about some alternatives that we can use instead of this. So this is the next vessel that I want to talk about. I absolutely love this container. It's a really beautiful ceramic urn and I just think it's so charming. However, it is a very awkward shape for arranging florals in. It's very shallow. This is maybe only 4 inches deep, and it's very narrow on the bottom and pretty wide at the top. So that means that there's not a lot of stem length to hold the flowers in place. So everything is going to be very top heavy, and just because of the structure of all of those things I just mentioned, the flowers are a lot more likely to fall over and out of this container. It's just a bad recipe. So I'm going to introduce you to something called frogs. These are one of the most fun things that you can collect from thrift stores and antique markets. They're such a nostalgic thing for me because my mom's always collected them. So these ones in my hands, you can get them in all sorts of different sizes. This one is about 1.5 inches. This one's about maybe 2.5 inches. These are exceptionally heavy because they're made of iron. And they basically are just little circles that have all of these spikes sticking out of them. It's almost like a hairbrush, but very, very heavy and painful. So what you do with this is you place this at the bottom of your vessel, and because it's so heavy, it's going to sink right to the bottom. So the design process with an iron frog is pretty simple. All you're going to do is just fill your vessel with water, plop the frog down in. You can do this before or after you put the water in, it doesn't matter. And then just simply stick your stems inside in amongst those prongs. It takes a little bit of getting used to, just in terms of angling your stems, but it's kind of the sort of thing that once you get your base stems in the frog, you can kind of go without using it and just stick the remainder in amongst those stems, and everything will work on holding each other in place. One thing that can be a little bit tricky when you're working with frogs like this is that the prongs are so close together. And so some stems, especially if they're pretty thick and dense or woody, they can be difficult to stick into the frog and have stay there. So what I do is I just take a knife and I make a very angled cut to thin the stem out, and then it should slide right in. The next container that I want to talk about is the one that we're going to be designing in today. It's a very similar sort of shape to the previous one we looked at, except it's a bit of a bigger scale. This, you're going to have the same sort of problems we've already talked about. Stems are going to be top heavy, so they're going to be migrating to the outer sides of this container. It's pretty shallow, so your chances of stems just falling right out of the vase are pretty high. So I'm going to talk about a different type of frog with this one, and then we can get designing. So another one, which is maybe my favorite, are glass or crystal frogs. These are so fun. There's so many interesting ones out there. You can get them like in different colored glasses, different shapes, different heights. They're really fun, and in a lot of containers it's actually kind of fun to be able to see the frog within it. So this frog I really like with this container because it just sits right in there, kind of near the surface. So the holes are really easy to find. They're right up at the top, it's not sunk down in, and the fact that you have so much water underneath the frog means that it's going to be easier to kind of angle your stems and create a more structural look. One thing I'll say about this also is it kind of takes the guesswork out of designing, because really, unless you're working with very small stems, only one stem can kind of fit in each of these holes. And so this has 16 holes, so I'm just gonna work with 16 stems and see how that kind of fills this out. So let's get started. I've picked an array of spring blooms from the garden outside, and before any flower experts come for me, I know that you shouldn't be putting cut daffodils in with other flowers. Apparently they can be toxic when they're cut to the other flowers in the vase, and I don't care. I'm just gonna enjoy this while it lasts and we'll be fine. I have these really beautiful kind of corally raspberry tulips. I'm gonna strip all of the leaves right off of them. I want this arrangement to really be focusing on just the flowers themselves and not any of the greens. I really love greens. I don't have anything against greens in arrangements, but for this, I'm just gonna keep it very, very simple. I think that when you're starting out with floral design, it's easy to get carried away. You see these crazy elaborate arrangements on Pinterest or on Instagram and think that you need to be going like hog wild right away. And while that can be really fun, experimenting with different colors and shapes, sometimes keeping it very simple, I think, is really chic, but it also just makes less decisions for you to make, and so it keeps it really easy when you're just starting out to guarantee that you're gonna end up with something beautiful that doesn't clash or look unprofessional. So I really only have 3 colors that I'm working with here. This really beautiful brilliant yellow from the daffodils. I have 2 stems that I just had to bring. These were the only white daffodils I had blooming, so I had to pop those in there just for a little accent. And then we have our tulips. So I'm gonna start with the blooms that I have the most of, and that is daffodils, so that we can evenly distribute that color. And also, you need to put water in your vessel. That would be great if I could remember that. So when you're deciding on the length of your stems and you're making your very first cut, I like to just kind of hold the stem up to the vase and just kind of estimate about there. I'm gonna give this a bit of an angled cut just so that it goes into that hole a little bit better. And if it's wrong, then that's fine. I think that looks fine. It's always safer to cut them a little bit longer than you think you might need, because you can always go shorter, but you can't go longer. Frogs are quite interesting too because they automatically space out your blooms. So this is a look that I wouldn't have been able to achieve otherwise, and it's a little bit different. It's not so dense, but I kind of like that because it gives every bloom a lot of room to just breathe and, I don't know, do what it wants to do. It's not busy, you're really just focusing on looking at the stems themselves, which is kind of fun. I'm gonna go in with my tulips. Tulips grow quite a bit when they're in water. So if you've had cut tulips before, you'll probably know that they get extremely long, and all of their petals, this just from being inside, this was closed this morning, and it's just been inside in the warmth in some water for a few hours, and it's already starting to curl outwards like this. I love when tulips do that. They create a completely different flower. It's just stunning. And so I'm gonna cut these a little bit shorter than I did the daffodils because I know that they're going to grow and just kind of get floppy and crazy, and I'm all about that. If you've never smelt a daffodil before, also, you are missing out. They actually have the sweetest fragrance. It's one of my absolute favorites. I'm just gonna slightly alter this now that I have everything spaced out. These just need to be in slightly different spots. And I don't know if you can hear that, but it just started pouring rain outside, which is the perfect atmospheric element to bring to making a spring arrangement. So there you have it. This is our finished arrangement. I love how laid back and casual this style of designing is. It just looks like exactly what it is, that I went out to the garden, picked a few stems, and popped them in a vase. And with the use of some of these tricks I talked about in this video, it is that simple to create this effortless look. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it wasn't the most in-depth floral design. There's not a lot going on here, but that's what I love about it. I think that when you're starting out, simple is absolutely the best, easiest, most gratifying way to go. So I hope this gave you a little bit of inspiration for some spring florals of your own. If you enjoyed this video, you can give it a like down below and subscribe for more content just like this, and I will see you back here next time.